Every few years, a game comes along that changes the industry. And Genshin Impact is one of those games. Not many people had heard of miHoYo before September 2020. The Chinese game studio was founded in 2012 by 3 students at university. It now has over 2,400 employees, making miHoYo quite possibly the fastest growing game developer in the world. Their recent hit title, Genshin Impact, has received attention for many reasons, one of which is its record-breaking revenue, with mobile income alone surpassing $1 billion in just 6 months, making it the quickest game in history to reach this milestone, and this figure doesn't include revenue generated on PC or PlayStation. And there are other reasons this game could be considered historically significant, from the unprecedented level of global reach it's had for a game made in China, to its technological achievements on mobile systems, or even the specifics of its monetization methods. You could argue that anyone with an interest in the gaming industry should probably have at least some understanding of Genshin Impact and why it's been so successful. And I have an interest in the gaming industry. And yet when Genshin Impact came out, I didn't play it. I didn't even look at it. Really, I tried not to even acknowledge its existence because I knew, without playing, looking, or acknowledging, that I didn't like this game. This was not because of its anime aesthetic. I'm not the biggest fan of anime, but I'm not the smallest fan either, and some of my favourite pieces of media are anime. It also wasn't because Genshin Impact was Chinese. I don't have a problem with Chinese games, and some of my favourite games that I've played this year have been Chinese. And it wasn't even because of its reputation as a Zelda clone. I like Breath of the Wild. I might like more Breath of the Wild, and some of my closest friends are in fact clones. No, there was just one reason I didn't like this game. One word which carried such dire implications in my mind that the mere invocation of it was the only thing I needed to know. I wanted to stay far, far away. Gacha. Not gotcha. I hear people say it that way sometimes, quite often actually, and that's wrong. It's gacha, derived from the Japanese toy dispensing vending machines gachapon, where you exchange money for a capsule that may or may not contain what you actually want. It's actually an onomatopoeia describing the 2 sound effects involved, where gacha is the sound of the vending machine handle turning, and pon is the sound of dreams breaking in young children. When it came to the video games, they just got rid of the pon part though. Better optics that way. If there's one thing everyone loves, it's monetization. Once upon a time, people used to just buy complete games. They'd walk into a shop, make a one-time payment, and get a complete product, no strings attached. Luckily, those dark days are behind us, and now such primitive upfront transactions are on the decline. Welcome to the new age of monetization. We have it all. Loot boxes, paywall, subscriptions, in-game advertisements, take your pick. Or don't, we don't care, we'll force it on you anyway. You can pay to win, pay to play, pay to display, and pay to make those goddamn fucking pop-up ads go away. We got in-game stores and out-of-game DLC, pre-order bonuses and post-purchase handicaps, cosmetics and conveniences, characters and customization, daily limits, monthly subs, seasonal passes, yearly events. It's never been easier to get rid of all that annoying, unwanted money. Really, we've got everything. Well, almost everything. The only thing that's missing is some way to make people sign over the entirety of their worthless lives. But how? How do we do this? By George, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my goddamn life. Okay, video game monetization is a subject where there is a risk in being over the top in your Nostradamus-like proclamations of the end times, but there's also a risk in being the opposite. New and aggressive monetization methods haven't exactly ruined the fertile fields of the gaming landscape overnight, but there has been a slow creep of the intrusive and unwanted into the games of tomorrow, like the ever-advancing march of a plague-ridden tortoise. There are reasons to believe this slope may be slippery. I mean, what's acceptable today wasn't acceptable in the past, and there's a monetary incentive for companies to keep pulling on the udders of their audiences to squeeze out as much milk as they possibly can, short of forcing players to migrate to greener pastures. But at the same time, games themselves have changed. Traditional monetization methods aren't always the best fit for every type of game. Audiences do retain some power through purchasing, and reasonably priced gaming experiences haven't just went the way of the dinosaurs. We're in a world where people do have a choice, and at some level, it makes sense to respect the choices of others, and accept that people can spend their money on what they want. So, it's a complicated topic, but that doesn't mean there isn't a problem here. Ultimately, we must each ask ourselves what is and isn't acceptable, and then let our voices be heard through our actions. Which is easier said than done when the same companies that want your money will also try to influence what you consider acceptable. So, to have any real hope of resisting a worse future, lines must be drawn somewhere. And a day did come where upon the sandy beaches of my mind, I drew that line and drew it well. And on the unacceptable side of that line was Gacha. All of it. But what is Gacha? Why is Gacha? How is Gacha? And where is Gacha? There's no who is Gacha, that would be ridiculous, but these other questions are important. I have a problem here though, which is that I don't know who you are. You could be anyone. I mean, you look like a Blue Yeti microphone, but you're probably a person, and people have different levels of familiarity with the Gacha genre, amongst other topics this video will touch on. So I'll try to keep this explanation brief, yet informative. Gacha, not gotcha, is a genre of games that grew in popularity over the last decade, particularly in Asian markets. They're usually free-to-play mobile games, and the already explained name is no coincidence, as while the gameplay of gacha games varies greatly, the unifying quality is the gambling-like method of monetization through which players acquire in-game characters and items. This activity, usually referred to as pulling or rolling, involves exchanging an in-game currency that can be purchased with out-of-game currencies in order to gain random rewards. Imagine loot boxes, and that's pretty much it. But the difference between the loot boxes of the West and Gacha is that in Gacha, the entire game is designed around this loot box-like element. This is usually done through large casts of likeable characters that players want to acquire, alongside a heavy focus on progression to make your characters, items, and time spent with the game have a greater sense of value. They're basically great big ever-updating progression treadmills in much the same way that MMOs often are, except without some of the catch-up mechanics. So gacha games can create a sense that you need to keep up, which you do through grinding and daily activities, but rolling for more characters might not hurt either. Gacha games are strongly associated with anime, and it's often anime girls that people are rolling for, with many popular anime having accompanying gacha games, but it's not a genre exclusively about anime characters. Raid: Shadow Legends is a gacha game, which might explain how they're able to fund their widespread content creator harassment campaign, but there are also gacha games for many big franchises, including Star Wars, Marvel, Disney, and others. And plenty of video game franchises have got in on the action too. I mean, Final Fantasy has had 4 different gacha games. How that happened, I don't know, but I do know why. Money. And they do bring home the bacon, with some of the big boys pulling in over $1 billion revenue per year, and there are quite a few boys these days. It's a bit of a sausage fest. The metaphor, that is, the games are kind of the opposite. It's a growing genre, and for people who partake in the gacha way of life, it can be serious business. By which I mean, it can be fucking expensive. A few years ago, the Wall Street Journal ran a piece on a guy who spent $70,000 on Fate Grand Order. And while such ground-shakingly exorbitant figures are a rarity, meeting people who have spent $1,000 or $2,000 on a particular game is more common than you might imagine. It's also common, at least from my personal experience, for those same people who spent a few $1,000s to possibly be in denial that spending such a large sum on a free mobile game might be considered excessive. £1,000, that's nothing, they say. You should see what the whales spend, they say. I'm just a dolphin. My response to this has usually been to politely ask them to stop throwing aquatic mammal names at me and pay your fucking rent on time. I have since come to think of the whale as a mythical animal, existing in the minds of gacha spenders to provide dogmatic justification that no matter how much a person might spend, at least there is some sea creature out there who is apparently spending more, so I guess that makes whatever you spend okay. It's like in Star Wars, there's always a bigger fish in the sea, at least in your mind there is. Yes, the relationship between man and his gacha is a strange thing to behold. People love these games. They also hate them. Sometimes they love them while hating them. Sometimes they make love to them while hating them, although we don't need to talk about that. What we do need to talk about is the most valuable thing of all: time. You could play a gacha game successfully without spending a penny, and people do, but you can't get very far in one of these games without some serious time investment. As I said previously, the core of these games is usually progression, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the morning when you log in to do your dailies. And if people can spend thousands of dollars in these virtual anime girl menageries, they can likewise spend thousands of hours. Gacha can be a commitment. You may be wondering why people play these games if there are all these downsides. Well, there are 5 unique reasons, as identified by me, and we'll get to most of them later. Something that isn't one of these reasons, however, is gameplay. People do enjoy the gameplay of their favourite gacha game, but through extensive research I have concluded that this is not one of the main draws to the genre. My reasoning for this is that other games offer more or better gameplay for less time or money, and that the core gameplay of many gacha titles is very repetitive. And some gacha games just don't really have gameplay, as is the case with something like Uma Musume, which is currently the most popular gacha game in Japan, and is just about training horse girls. This might seem a little weird, but you have to understand the Japanese actually take their horse racing very seriously. Horse racing has a long tradition in Japan, and it's a culture where respect and tradition are a really big deal. The horse girls also sing and dance. Okay, point is, it's not about the gameplay, even though there usually is gameplay. The gameplay is just what ties the experience together. So, in summary, gacha, not gotcha, and not necessarily a good life decision. It's like gambling, except without the possibility of winning money. Or, when you consider the time requirements, it's like a second job, except instead of making money while you do it, you lose money. So I guess maybe it's more like a way of life, except a bad one. At least, that's how it seems from the outside. Gacha seems less like a game genre and more like an addiction, a hobby offering danger, excitement, and cute collectible anime girls that can also bring ruin, pain, and suffering. It's like alcohol, cigarettes, or slot machines for a younger, more anime girl-obsessed generation, and this appeal might be difficult to understand, but it clearly exists regardless. Actually, it reminds me of the way in which MMOs were talked about during the peak of their popularity. Welcome to Azeroth. Quit your job, fail your degree, and future-proof your virginity. You'll love every second. And that comparison of gacha to MMOs runs deep, but it's worth pointing out that the fear-mongering of MMOs as this new, life-destroying gaming obsession did prove in most cases to be somewhat hyperbolic. As for where Genshin Impact fits with all this, well, this is a gacha game, and it might be the most successful one ever made. Only time will tell, but that's not the only thing that makes Genshin unique. You see, gacha was a mobile genre, and mobile games had a history of predatory and intrusive monetization methods long before gacha cemented itself as a thing. But Genshin Impact isn't exclusively a mobile game, and its focus on open-world gameplay is a radical departure from the largely menu-based gacha tradition. And so, Genshin Impact is an answer to the question of what happens if you take the wildly financially successful gacha model and combine it with a more conventional big-budget, highly polished single-player experience. And the loudest answer to that question is, you make money. Which means more games may well be motivated to follow in its wake. Genshin Impact is an intrepid explorer, forging a path into gaming lands previously untouched to set down the colonizing flag of its uniquely addictive monetization, and others will probably take notice. And that's why I wanted nothing to do with this game. It was an invader, and when its success leads others to follow suit, I was worried the land I cared for might be changed for the worse. And I would have had nothing to do with this game until 6 months ago when I decided I wanted to create a deep dive into the Chinese gaming industry, and so I began that journey with some preliminary research involving playing some of the most important Chinese games ever made, the first of which was Genshin Impact. As a long-time hater of gacha, who had no actual first-hand experience with the genre but did have a maybe surprising amount of negative second-hand experience, I went into this game not only expecting to dislike it, but also with a desire to use my time with this game to confirm to myself all the negative stereotypes I had about the genre. I wanted to prove to myself that gacha is evil, and I was going to do that with Genshin Impact. That didn't happen though. Genshin Impact doesn't start strong. The opening cutscene might impress in terms of animation, but the narrative hook it presents feels weak. In the past, your character had travelled to different worlds alongside your twin, until one day an unknown god showed up to abduct your twin, leaving you stranded in the land of Teyvat. You then awake many years later and set off to search for your twin with your newfound companion Paimon, a small floating child creature you apparently fished out of the sea one time. Paimon is, in many ways, the real main character of this story. I mean, you are a mostly silent protagonist, and Paimon is going to accompany you every step of your journey, guiding you in the direction the writers want you to follow. Really, she is the true heart and soul of this narrative, there to inject personality and humour into the frequent long stretches of dialogue with her jovial naivety, and my god, does it hurt me to listen to this character in English.
Kaya, what kind of treasure is it? Gold? Or better yet, gems?
Hearing her speak makes me feel like I am doing something wrong by playing this game. It makes me want to look around my room every 5 minutes to confirm I'm actually alone, because I feel worried one of my parents will walk in and be disappointed in me. And I haven't lived with my parents for over 10 years. So I changed the language to Japanese and never looked back, until I came to make this video where I replayed the first 10 hours of the game and was reminded of just how much pain this voice causes me. Over my many hours with this game, I have come to thoroughly like this creature, in much the same way that one might like a slightly annoying pet. Yes, they're not the exact creature I would have chosen if I was given a choice, but as long as they don't urinate on the carpet or bite small children, I'm more than happy to look after them and show them affection, while I convince myself and others around me that their annoyingness actually just gives them more character. This would not have been possible if I hadn't changed the language, however. Maybe this is a problem with me more than Genshin Impact, I don't know. I don't understand the science of why changing the language from English to Japanese eliminates the emotion of cringe for some people, and if this...
Paimon will take you to the animal god's place first, and there's the reason why.
doesn't make you cringe, then I respect and admire your mental fortitude. But I still feel this creature should come with some kind of warning. Once you escape the first few conversations, however, it doesn't take long to be enveloped in the blissful vistas of Genshin's open world, which frequently looks phenomenal. From the appealing colour palette to the seemingly limitless draw distance that's always reminding you of all the exciting places you have yet to explore, this world is able to make you want to spend time in it through visual design alone. But it has more to offer than visuals. In fact, this virtual space is so densely packed with chests, collectibles, and other things to uncover that even a short walk across its landscapes can lead you to making so many discoveries that it can feel a bit like you're injecting an illegal quantity of dopamine straight into your bloodstream. The world unravels before you like a never-ending breadcrumb trail of shiny things to interact with, where you can always see at least one more objective to head to from any given location. A lot of these objectives are connected to simple puzzles or combat encounters that rarely challenge, but still provide a surprising amount of satisfaction, which is probably because even without a great degree of challenge, the player still feels like they're always interacting with the world around them in some way. In many open world games, the world itself acts as a container for the activities, missions, or quests that the game revolves around, but in Genshin Impact, the world isn't just a space to do fun things in. The world itself is the fun thing. The experience is about exploration, and the many chests and puzzles this world is packed with are just there to be a reward for that exploration. And it works. Curiosity is rewarded. Moving from one place to another will have you constantly scanning your surroundings, always being invested in what might be around you, and while the simple challenges and hidden secrets fall short of being truly mentally taxing, they still force regular engagement. If you see something floating in the sky, you'll have to work out how to actually reach it. Head to one chest instead of another and you'll find yourself plotting a mental map of the many places you need to return to get everything, and the first time you solve each of the many different environmental interactions and secrets provide bite-sized eureka moments that leave you feeling smugly satisfied at your intellect, regardless of whether or not they actually require that much intellect, because hey, at least you worked it out for yourself. And if finding one thing is easy, finding everything isn't. And so, in much the same way that a collectathon works by giving you lots of easy things to find that come together to create a more challenging optional objective of finding everything, for those who enjoy exploring the world, there is a challenging end goal made possible but not easy by craftable items that help you track down those last remaining items. But keep exploring and the puzzles do become more complicated, the chests more spread out, and the environments more hazardous. And yet the pinball-like motion of bouncing from one objective to the next remains an enjoyable activity for hours and hours. I've explored the entire base game plus all content added since release, and I still want more. I feel like I might always want more, and even more surprisingly, when I started to replay this game again for this video, during which I was exploring places I had already explored before, while knowing that all progress I was making was entirely meaningless, even then I still found the core activity of exploring the world and collecting its treasure thoroughly enjoyable and felt an urge to keep going even when it came time to say goodbye. This is very impressive to me, and I can't think of any other game that offers a similar experience. Well, except for one, I guess. Before its release, Genshin Impact was dubbed a Breath of the Wild clone, and in its early days it probably got considerably more criticism for this quality than anything to do with gacha or monetization. China does have a history of playing fast and loose with intellectual property laws, maybe because for years China just didn't care about intellectual property laws, but regardless, there are reasons to be skeptical of this sort of thing, and there are some obvious similarities between the two titles, with the most apparent being the stamina system used to sprint, climb, swim, and glide. Breath of the Wild's stamina system is great. It takes simple traversal-related activities and adds a small layer of player involvement to turn something that is usually automatic into something more engaging. When you climb, you aren't just pushing forward on an analog stick and waiting. Instead, you're actively managing your stamina meter, looking ahead to judge distances, and making decisions based on your surroundings. And Genshin Impact copies this system almost one for one. But I don't see that as a problem. Good gameplay systems should be copied, and there's more to both of these games than a stamina meter. There are a few other similarities. The worst to me is how similar Genshin's Hilichurls are to Breath of the Wild's Bokoblins. It's not grounds for a lawsuit or anything, but it does feel creatively bankrupt. Still, that's one small part of two very large games, and the list of ways in which these games are different is almost endless. And some of the other similarities people have pointed out feel like a stretch. Like, yeah, both games do have green grass and blue skies, but so does something else. The Windows XP wallpaper. All these games ripping this off is frankly outrageous, but that's hardly Genshin Impact's fault. Both games do focus on exploration though, and both also make the world itself and the way you traverse and interact with it the main focus of that exploration, but if anything, this kind of exploration-based experience almost feels like it could be its own genre. What I'm saying is, I want more games like this, not less. And despite the focus on exploration, there are still ways these games do exploration differently. Like how Breath of the Wild is a deeply intrinsically driven experience, whereas Genshin Impact is almost as densely packed with progression systems as its world is with chests. Really, Breath of the Wild is a great game, and it makes sense that parts of its design would influence future games, and while the influence it's had on Genshin Impact does seem clear, after spending a lot of time with this game, it's impossible for me not to see Genshin as wholly its own thing. So, when it comes to similarities with Zelda, it doesn't seem like a problem to me, but there are other problems. Some of which come from the progression-packed, extrinsically driven design. Like how there are so many currencies, items, and unlockables in this game that it can frequently feel overwhelming, and the early game is absolutely choked with pop-ups, tutorial menus, and little red exclamation marks telling you to check something in this particular menu that seem to always start reappearing the instant you get rid of them all. Even the extra rewards get annoying, as your early hours are a frenzy of achievements, adventure ranks, and handbook rewards that end up acting a bit like mini barriers standing in the way of actually playing the game. This is made worse by the way that none of the many different currencies and items you pick up have any meaning to you early on, except possibly Primogens, because for the others you won't have interacted much with the actual progression systems they're used in. Someone watching me play in my early days expressed shock that I was leaving behind items dropped by monsters. I have enough goblin droppings, I said. Why would I need to waste time picking up even more? With the knowledge I have now, I understand this person's shock, and on my personal list of the most ignorant things I have ever said in my entire life, I rank my disregard of goblin drop-ins as a solid 4th highest of all time. That's pretty high. Eventually, the way in which almost every item in this world plays at least some role in your future progression is something that could be considered a positive, at least to the right kind of player, but the way the game handles this certainly doesn't benefit the early game experience. In your blissfully ignorant early game adventures, you'll also start getting to grips with the combat. Genshin Impact has a similar battle system to many other action JRPGs, except where most games have the player controlling a single character with AI-controlled teammates, Genshin instead allows you to directly control all 4 of your party members, which you do by quick swapping between them with only one character on the battlefield at a time. With only one attack, one skill, and one ultimate ability per character, plus a universal dodge, each avatar can feel simplistic to control when considered as a single entity, but it's through your ability to freely swap between characters that combat is given depth, as you're forced to manage multiple cooldowns while setting up synergies between characters. This mostly happens through the elemental system. Every character belongs to one of 6 elements: fire, water, ice, electric, rock, and wind, plus an unreleased 7th element, but we don't talk about that. Never talk about that. Character special attacks will apply an elemental status to enemies on hit, which produces an elemental interaction when the next element is applied. These elemental interactions are generally what you'd expect, and most just boil down to first element plus second element equals more damage, except for water and ice, which freezes enemies, and rock and anything, which gives you a shield. Elemental interactions also apply to the environment, and can be applied to you too by enemies, as you'll quickly be reminded every time you come into contact with ice and water at the same time. The elemental system isn't deep, but combining elemental statuses feels satisfying and basically means every single character in the game can perform some kind of combo with every other character. Making these combos produce large numbers through specific elemental interactions, alongside specific character skills and builds, is really where combat comes into its own, but you probably won't realise this until much later. Still, the novelty of elemental interactions alongside solid animations and visuals means killing enemies is enjoyable enough that the interruption to exploration it creates feels easily forgivable. More so than the story, at least. Genshin's narrative is frequently slow-paced with long stretches of dialogue, often involving unimportant NPCs who have a tendency to give out unimportant tasks, and foolishly, there's also no way for players to skip entire conversations. In the first multi-hour chapter, you're introduced to Mondstadt, the City of Freedom, which is having trouble with a misunderstood dragon. Here, you start to befriend Genshin's large cast of characters, but it's not until the introduction of Venti that the story starts to find its footing. This carefree bard is soon revealed to be the 1,000-year-old god of wind that everyone here supposedly worships, although no one actually realises this, even after he tells them. Venti is a reluctant deity who seems to care little for the duties of divinity. Instead, his interests are more focused on music and alcohol, which he has trouble getting his hands on due to his youthful appearance. His outwardly free-spirited playfulness is tempered with occasional moments of introspective wisdom, and his similar status of outsider to Mondstadt makes his newfound friendship with the player's character feel easy to believe in. If any of that sounds a little anime, well, it is, and that's as much a positive as negative. Still, moments with Venti succeed where other early quests and plotlines might not, because Venti brings personality, and it's in this type of character-focused moment where Genshin Impact's narrative is at its best. That said, the overarching plotline of the dragon does feel rather uninspired, but there's more to Genshin Impact than story, characters, combat, or even exploration, as I eventually found out. The world isn't a great place. I mean, I'm sorry if you like it here, but it's true. There are problems, and I think we all know this. Still, it's not just the world, it's us too. I'm sure we're all doing our best, but clearly we make mistakes, or maybe our best just isn't good enough. What I'm saying is that things could be better, and yeah, they could be worse, but they could be better. And you could make something better, if you had that power. There's a genre of anime called isekai. The word translates to another world, which describes what happens to the protagonists in these stories, and this is a genre that's grown to be massively popular over the last 10 years. But isekai is more than a genre of anime, people just don't always realise it. I mean, 3 of the most important pieces of fantasy fiction ever created, Alice in Wonderland, The Chronicles of Narnia, and The Wizard of Oz, are classic isekai stories. Games have their fair share of isekai narratives too, including, but not limited to, Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, Ni no Kuni, the entire Digimon series, and in many ways, Pokémon. And I don't just mean the Mystery Dungeon series, which is literally an isekai, but also the mainline games, which are thematically isekais, It's just instead of being physically transported into another world, the main characters just come of age and are given a Pokemon, which becomes a thematic portal into another world, and the adventure then plays out exactly according to classic isekai tradition. The question of why isekai anime has become quite so popular is a mystery to some people, because this is a genre that quickly became saturated, and plenty of these shows have so many similarities that it can just seem like the same story being told in slightly different ways. But clearly there is something about this archetypal story that deeply appeals to people. There is, of course, a narrative advantage to having your main character be transported into another world, because their unfamiliarity with their new surroundings is relatable to the audience, and can be an easy way to set up comedy or drama, a bit like how amnesia is a narratively useful trope for storytellers. But really, I think the appeal of isekai runs deeper. These stories are often power fantasies, with relatable, easy to self-insert into main characters, which, when combined with their settings, make them almost unrivaled as a form of escapism. One of the reasons fantasy is so effective as a genre is because it transports us to other worlds more interesting than our own, but isekais take this thematically appealing idea and then render it more directly, while often creating worlds and scenarios that play into our real-life fantasies of being important, living out adventure, and having multiple cute anime girls fall in love with you. Isekai anime took the dreams of anime watchers and then allowed for deliberately relatable anime protagonists to live them out on screen. I feel I should point out here, for anyone not familiar with the genre, that most of the protagonists in these shows are super powerful in these worlds as a direct result of their real-world elite gamer skills. Hopefully that speaks for itself. I've long believed that this is the reason Pokemon is the largest franchise in the world. It's not because of story, gameplay, graphics, or monetization. It's because the concept behind this franchise has such deep appeal at allowing people to step into another world that people want to step into, that this concept alone can sell the exact same game to the exact same people again and again, while maintaining near complete satisfaction. For years, I have thought that Pokemon is the almost objectively correct answer to the common hypothetical of, if you could live in any video game world, which would it be? And that this is what has driven its continuous astronomical levels of success. But I'm not so sure the answer to that hypothetical is as clear-cut anymore. What I'm saying with this dangerously lengthy off-topic tangent is that Genshin Impact is an isekai game, and that I think it might be one of the greatest isekai games ever made. Genshin released with two large regions, Mondstadt and Liyue. If Mondstadt is an idyllic fantasy take on a quaint medieval Europe, complete with timber-framed buildings, knightly orders and aristocratic nobility, Liyue would be the idyllic fantasy take on a proud medieval China. Funnily enough, I didn't even know Liyue existed when I started this game. What trailers and footage I had seen had focused exclusively on Mondstadt, and my discovery of another entire landmass to explore was a very welcome one, but it was within this new region that the entire Genshin experience finally started to connect to me beyond just offering enjoyment through exploring. Liyue is better than Mondstadt in every meaningful way. The story still suffers from slow pacing with unimportant NPCs giving out unimportant tasks, but the city of Liyue has a much stronger sense of culture. The story here has a heavy focus on the Chinese concepts of guanqi, meaning relations between people, particularly those relating to business, and renqin, which are acts of kindness, honour, or duty. This is exemplified by the region's deity, Rex Lapis, the god of contracts and money, whose mysterious death after a prosperous 1,000-year reign has now plunged the city into political turmoil, and you really get a sense of this region's more unique and original culture through this story. Some parts still drag, but overall it's a step up from what comes before it. And the environmental exploration makes even bigger improvements, in part because of a slight decrease in density and increase in complexity of the many findable things, but also because the environments themselves are just more interesting. Golden trees, azure waters, and towering stone pillars litter the Liyue landscapes, offering breathtaking views aplenty. But it was when I first scaled the Qinyuan peaks that I realised that this world, and this game, has a quality much greater than the sum of its parts. It was here, as I sat amongst the clouds just listening to the soundtrack while the sun welcomed a new day, that this quality really became clear to me. There is one word that I think accurately describes Genshin Impact's world: idyllic. Fair warning, I'm about to use this word many times in the rest of this section. I might even use the word idyllicism. That's not actually a word, but I'll probably use it anyway, because my god does this game just exude absolute pure idyllicism. You hear it in the soundtrack, see it in the landscapes, and feel it in the character interactions, and it's with you everywhere you go. It's in the precise hues of the colour palette, the reward-filled expanse of the overworld, the specific flavours of seasonal events, and the smaller details like how you receive letters on each character's birthday, where they tell you how much you mean to them. You may not have seen these characters in months, but it doesn't matter. Your friendship is as strong as ever, and it always will be. They love you. They'll always love you. I don't know how much objective value this feeling of idyllicism has. I don't know how you could compare it to more commonly compared attributes like narrative or gameplay. I do know that whenever I hear the music for this particular region, I'm struck by a strong sense of nostalgia. A lot of video game music fills me with nostalgia, but it's always music that I first heard years ago, the music from my childhood. I first explored Liyue a few months ago, and I already feel deeply nostalgic for that time. There have been days where, after logging into this game for mechanical or progression-related reasons, that I delayed the act of logging off, out of a desire to spend a few more minutes with this world. With lunch breaks almost over, real-life workloads mounting, and all the many pressures of life weighing heavy on my shoulders, I have cherished the serene beauty of this world and let its relaxing atmosphere flow through me. Genshin Impact can be as idyllic as any game I have ever experienced, and that means something. At least it did to me. And it's through this clear desire to create the ideal that the story finally starts to make sense. Like with many isekai and many games, there is a power fantasy dynamic to your character's relationship with this world. Where other characters in Genshin Impact have one or no elemental affinities, you have the potential to have many. Your main objective of finding your missing twin becomes an excuse to travel the world, befriending its inhabitants along the way as you fix the world's biggest problems. You are restoring these places to the idyllic way they were always meant to be, and the characters you meet quickly become your friends and confide in you their dreams and desires with the absolute sincerity that only an anime character can truly possess. Ayaka recently told me that she's never had any real friends, due to the pressure of a highborn life imposed upon her from an early age, leaving her distant from family and peers. I told her I would be her friend. She responded by saying this.
ありがとうございます。私、とても嬉しく思います。すみません。
お恥ずかしい姿を見せてしまいました。
This couldn't happen in real life. It would be, at best, incredibly awkward, and at worst, worse. But in Genshin Impact, it isn't. It feels natural because the entire game is this sincere, and all these characters are similarly idealized. Later that day, I went to a festival with Ayaka, which revealed how important she is to the people of Inazuma, even if she hadn't realized this until now. At the end of this, she told me she wanted to go to a festival again. I told her I did too. Then we talked about our families, and she danced for me beneath the moonlit sky. She told me she would always be there for me.
友人として私があなたを見守り支えます。はい、そう言っていただけて安心しました。
Except that's a lie. You won't be there for me because I haven't actually paid to unlock you. And that's the problem with the idyllic. It never fucking lasts. I once asked a Discord server full of what can only be described as Gacha enthusiasts why they liked these games so much. The first and most common answer was one word: waifus. Waifu is a term so common in the internet lexicon of today that I'm not sure I need to explain it. But while I and others may know what waifus are, I've never been quite as sure why waifus are. For long have I pondered this question. I feel intrinsically that of all the questions of the universe, this is one that truly matters. To this end, I have done what all great minds do when faced with a question to which they know not the answer. I tried to see if anyone else had a good answer I could borrow. So I searched in academic journals, but alas, my search proved not to be a fruitful one. I checked Google Scholar, but did not find any results. I even went back to basics, starting where all should start when chasing life's greatest mysteries, but this time the Greeks did not have the answer. Clearly, academics, scientists, philosophers, and other great minds are just as lost about this phenomenon as I am. All I can conclude is that maybe the simplest answer is the best one. That people just like characters, and you can take away the anime veneer and that phenomenon doesn't go away. Fan fiction, cosplay, mascots, comfort characters, celebrity worship, the entire way we choose to present most fictional stories, our like for characters can be seen everywhere in our lives. Waifu is just the natural human enjoyment of characters in anime form, with a heavy side of self-aware, often self-deprecating irony from a community that has found pleasure in embracing the over-the-top nature of their enjoyment of a character, so as to be able to express that enjoyment openly while partaking in a community-based meta-humour surrounding the situation. And when considered that way, it doesn't sound weird at all, at least no more weird than most things that have grown from internet subcultures. I don't have a waifu. I've never had a waifu, but my channel icon is a picture of the magnificent Porco Rosso from the Magnificent Porco Rosso. There's no real reason for this. There is no connection between this character and my channel. There's no meaning I'm trying to signify. Actually, I deliberately chose this image because it's not very clear what it is. I wanted to have Porco Rosso as my channel icon without people necessarily realizing that's what it is, precisely because I didn't want to give this decision more meaning than I meant it to have. Really, I just like this character. Maybe Porco Rosso is my waifu. And I don't even like pigs or anthropomorphized characters. or Italians. That's not true. I have nothing against pigs. I mean, they taste delicious. But while I don't feel a need to own a Porco Rosso Dakimakura that I take out to dinner every Sunday, I do like this character. We all like certain characters. It's human. It was probably hardwired into our brains over the course of our evolution to prevent us from going extinct. Some of us like characters in real life too. We call them friends. We form attachments to people, whether they're fictional or not, and certain characteristics might make us form stronger attachments, like whether their personalities display idealized virtues, or whether we find them cute. And there's nothing wrong with any of this, it's just a part of the human condition. So perhaps it was only a matter of time until something came along to prey on this through direct monetization that combines our human love of characters with addictive luck-based gambling. Here's how that works in Genshin Impact. This is a free-to-play game. There is a currency called Primogems. This is awarded to players for exploring the world, completing quests, and participating in events, among other things. You can also buy Primogems with money, either through a reasonably priced monthly pass, called the Blessing of the Welkin Moon, or just directly, which happens to be less reasonably priced. Primogems are used to roll for characters. In-game, this is called wishing, and in other gacha games, this is sometimes called pulling or summoning, but it's always a similar activity. Each wish has a chance to give a weapon or character. In Genshin, this can be 3-star, 4-star or 5-star, with higher being better. As this is a Chinese game, it means that by law, the exact probability of what you can get has to be included in-game for people to see. And from this, we know that each wish has a base rate of 0.6% to be a 5-star and 5.1% for a 4-star, with every other wish being a 3-star weapon, which can just be considered unimportant trash. In addition to the base rate, there is a pity system, which means that after a certain number of wishes without winning a higher rate item, the probability will increase until it's 100%. This means that because of pity, you are guaranteed at least one 4-star every 10 wishes and one 5-star every 90 wishes, and this means the average probability of receiving a 4-star each wish ends up being 13%, with 5 stars being 1.6%. This comes to an average of one 5-star every 62.5 wishes. And I'm sorry if this seems like a lot of information to take in, but we are far from done. Each wish costs 160 Primogems. Therefore, the average cost in Primogems for one 4-star is 1,230.77, and for a 5-star, it's 10,000. The monthly pass costs $5 and gives 3,000 Primogems, spread out over 30 days. Through this, we could propose a Primogen value per dollar, which would be 600, meaning the average cost per 4-star is $2, and per 5-star, it's $16.7. However, and there will be many howevers, so prepare yourself. However, the monthly pass gives a set amount of Primogens, and you can only buy one pass per month. If you wanted more Primogens, you'd need to buy them directly, where the exact cost can vary, and there are first-time buyer bonuses, but excluding the first-time bonus, the best rate would be $100 for 8,080 Primogens. This gives us a Primogen per dollar value of 80.8, which is considerably less than 600. Our average cost per 4-star with this value is $15.2, and per 5-star is $123.8. So these are our average costs. However, these are the costs per 4 or 5 star, not the cost of specific 4 or 5 stars. So, how do you get a specific character in Genshin Impact? Well, there are 3 different banners you can wish on: a standard banner, a featured weapon banner, and a featured character banner. The standard banner is always the same and contains every 4-star, but only 6 5-star characters out of a total of 16, and that total is increasing with each update. For these other 5-star characters, they appear one at a time on the featured character banner. Whenever you get a character on the featured banner, it has a 50% chance to be the featured character. Although, anytime you don't get a featured character on that banner, the rate of getting the featured character will increase to 100%, meaning next time it's guaranteed. This means the exact chance to get a featured character in a sample size greater than 1 is... I have no idea. I tried to find out, I really did. All I wanted to know was the average price per specific character after the first 50-50. So I tried to work it out and got lost, and then I started writing down lots of A's and B's where A is success to try to find a pattern. It looked like this, and I got nowhere. I just don't understand this type of probability. I can't find the way to get the number I need. So this is me giving up. Writing this right now is my official surrender. If you are an expert on conditional probability, please send help. I need it on the 31st of July at 7:21 PM. Obviously you would need a time machine, but I'm assuming if you understand this shit, the time machine won't be a problem. Let's just move on, and no, but however disappointed you are in me, I am more disappointed in myself. But I blame Gacha for my failing. Trying to work out the average cost of a common scenario doesn't make sense to me, and I tried more than I'd like to admit to try to force this to make sense. However, this failure says something. It says understanding the costs involved in this system is too fucking complicated for a normal person. However, we're still not done, because even with the added unknown cost to get a specific 5-star rather than just any 5-star, the costs can still potentially be higher because of constellations. Constellations are small bonuses for each character that are unlocked by getting duplicate versions of that character. There are a total of 6 constellations per character, so you need to get a character 7 times to get everything. Weapons have a similar system, by the way, and it's kind of worse. Anyway, right here is where I wanted to multiply my average cost per specific character by 7 to make a really shockingly large number. I can't do that though, so instead here is a calculation by YouTuber 1010, who wrote a script to do the calculations for him that sure looks pretty legit. And he makes the Primogen cost for a 6 constellation 5-star to be 117,120, which comes to about $1,460, using the most likely payment method. New 5-star characters release at a rate of 1 or 2 every 6 weeks, which would mean about 13 characters per year, so there'd be a yearly cost of around $18,890 to get every new 5-star character with all constellations, and that's without even considering weapons. Hopefully, this is a number that speaks for itself. Gacha, bad. The end. Except it's not. There are many things to say about this system, far too many for me to be able to realistically say them all, so now instead of trying to give exact figures and explain every system as I go, I'll instead transition to speaking in generalities and skipping to conclusions. You can play Genshin Impact without spending a penny, and the experience is still very good. You get 6 4-star characters for free early on, not including your main character, and you'll get many others very quickly by just playing the game. You only need a party of 4, so you will still get plenty of choice, and in time you'll also get some 5 stars. I haven't spent any money whatsoever on wishes, and I have 5 stars, 3 characters and 2 weapons, plus enough currency saved up to get around 2 more when I spend it. And I have never received a 5-star outside of pity, meaning this is with below average luck. I've been playing this game for around 5 months, so I've received over 1 5-star per month, and while that rate will decrease now I've completed all quests and exploration, it won't decrease by that much if I kept playing due to dailies, events and new content. So even as free to play, you'll get plenty of characters, including 5 stars. The actual difference between a 5-star and a 4-star character is also not that large, and constellations are even less important. There is no reason why you actually need 5-star characters to enjoy this game, or beat all content, let alone specific 5 stars, and you in no way need every 5-star or any constellations. Of course, spending money would make the game easier, but not by a large amount, and if you did ever find the game too hard, you can, at any time, decrease the world difficulty level, which is akin to turning the difficulty down 1 notch, and that problem would then be solved. There's only one piece of content in this game that could be considered genuinely difficult, and could make people feel like they need to spend money for gameplay related reasons, and that's the Spiral Abyss. We'll talk about that later, but for now, just know that it's not really that important. However, people do spend money on characters regardless of whether they need to, and some people will spend a lot, in part because the act of rolling for characters is fun. Gambling is fun, and rolling for characters is basically gambling. Gambling is bad in much the same way that alcohol is bad, which is to say that it can sometimes be incredibly destructive, or just slightly destructive, but it doesn't have to be, and many people enjoy it anyway. I'm not going to argue the morality of gambling, but just like with loot boxes in Western games, it feels important to at least call it what it is, and if you are someone with an addictive personality or just poor financial control, you really may want to simply avoid Genshin and every other gacha game for this reason. Still, I wouldn't actually consider Genshin Impact pay to win, because there's no way to win. There is no competitive side to this game, no PvP, no real multiplayer, no leaderboards. At best, you are paying to make the game slightly easier, but I imagine most people who spend money in this game are doing it simply because they want to own certain characters. This makes sense. We are a species that likes characters, and if you like one of these characters and like the game, you probably want to own that character in-game. If you don't carefully budget the primogens you get for free, your only option here may be spending real-life money or missing out, as character banners only run for a limited amount of time, adding a further level of exclusivity that adds more pressure on players and their wallets. The important thing to understand about this system of monetization is that it is designed to prey on people, just probably not you. And I say that for purely statistical reasons. Because many free-to-play monetization methods are designed around the principle that it's more effective to convince a small number of people to spend a large amount of money than it is to make many people spend a little bit of money. I.e., if only 1% of the player base spends money on your game, that can be better than having 100% of people spend money, as long as the 1% spend enough. Genshin Impact is no exception in this regard, and this is where those aquatic mammals mentioned earlier come in. The constellation system, which rewards you for getting the same character multiple times, can be outrageously expensive. A system like this is clear whale bait. It exists to be ignored by the majority of players while convincing the big spenders to spend big. Nobody needs constellations for 5-star characters, but some people will want them, and that's all it takes. And even if you ignore constellations, some people still want more characters than they can afford, and then there are also the specific quirks of the weapon banner, and so there are ways this game has been designed to be convincing when it comes to persuading players to part with their money. I mean, the fact that some things, like 5-star constellations, are so expensive is probably also designed to make other things look reasonably priced by comparison. This is probably why the monthly pass is so much better value than buying Primogems up front, because some people will buy Primogems regardless of how bad value they are, while others will then feel like they're getting a good deal by comparison for sticking to the reasonably priced monthly pass. And it's also why there are so many different currencies in this game. It's to obscure the actual monetary value involved. It's all one big cleverly designed system built for making money, and the data shows it works. There are different ways you can respond to this. You might say people should be free to spend their money on whatever they want because it's their money and what they do with it is up to them. And it is true that people should be responsible for their own money, but that doesn't mean a system that preys on people's irresponsibility is good. You might also say, what's the problem with tricking the rich to spend lots of money? I mean, in a way, isn't this just making the rich fund the game for those less well off? But it's naive to believe that everyone who spends large amounts of money on Gacha is rich. I don't have any evidence I can show you to prove this, but I can assure you it's not the case, and there are at least some people spending money they don't have on these types of games. Then there are the ways in which the Gacha system negatively impacts the rest of the experience. The most obvious of which is that it limits the amount of characters you get, and in general, more characters should mean more fun, while also restricting which characters you can get due to limited duration banners. The second most obvious thing is that failing to win characters based on random chance can be disappointing. This isn't a huge problem in Genshin Impact due to the pity system, but the 50-50 chance to get the featured character can lead to disappointment and frustration. Beyond these two reasons, the gacha system can also lead to annoying time gating for progression systems, and it means that characters joining your party often makes little sense narratively, as by rolling you end up with characters who you've never even met joining you, which is rather immersion breaking when you do meet them 20 hours later. But it wasn't any of these reasons why I most disliked the gacha system. For me, the biggest problem was how it clashed with the thing I loved the most, the idyllicism, and yes, I am still using this made-up word, because it doesn't feel made up to me. When Ayaka danced for me in the moonlight, I felt the hairs on my arm stand up slightly. As the culmination to this character's questline, it was a moving moment, but immediately afterwards I thought to myself how clearly this questline has been designed to try to part players from their money by making people want to roll for this new character. And so all the emotion this questline carried was tainted by a vague sense of manipulation. Genshin Impact can be so idyllic, and I love that quality, but Gacha is anything but, in the same way that no one would call a slot machine idyllic no matter how fun you might find it to be. And there are few things more cynical and anti-idyllic than preying on people's love for characters to maximise profits. So, I wouldn't exactly say I'm a fan of Gacha, but before I played this game, Gacha was something I genuinely hated, and that, at least, has changed. Gacha has its problems, and a lot of them are quite obvious, but through playing this game I realised that this type of monetization isn't as one-sided as I once thought. So, let me present the other side of the argument. In the West, we pay for games up front, it's how it's always been, but in China that isn't the case. Years of restrictive legislation meant gaming consoles were banned for years, and so free-to-play games became the norm, and it's a norm certain people like. The Western way isn't better just because that's what we're more used to, and there's an inclusivity to free-to-play games that can often be undervalued. Some people can't afford $60 or $70 for a new game, particularly in a country with high wealth inequality, and it's easy for people in the West to forget just how high this value can be to others who might be less fortunate. Free-to-play doesn't exclude these people, and in free-to-play models, what you pay really is a choice. I mean, if you don't enjoy the game, there's no reason to pay anything. In this system, no one can be misled by deceptive marketing or hype into buying a product that doesn't live up to players' expectations. Instead, you play the game first and then decide whether you want to financially support it based on your experience with it. I still prefer to pay upfront for a video game, it's what I'm used to, but I don't think the situation is black and white, and how a monetization system is handled seems far more important than what type of monetization system it is. And as for Gacha itself, sure, it does involve a system that's basically gambling, but this isn't exclusive to Gacha. Loot boxes are the same, but so are opening packs of cards in something like Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, or Pokemon. When I was young, I opened many a pack of Pokemon cards, and it's the same thing. There's even whale bait by way of shiny cards. You don't need them, but people sure wanted them, and they don't exist to improve the game, they exist to make you want to spend more money by tapping into the value of exclusivity while delivering extra dopamine when opening packs. And Pokemon cards are aimed directly at children, even if they were co-opted by YouTubers with too much money on their hands many years later. Anyway, if Gacha is a type of gambling, then this isn't something unique to Gacha. In fact, even outside of loot boxes and card games, many games deliberately utilize the dopamine rush that comes from getting lucky to make an experience that's more addictive. This is a large part of the appeal of loot-based games like Diablo and World of Warcraft, but it's also a part of games like Team Fortress and Counter-Strike, where luck-based items can even have real monetary value. And if Gacha is gambling, it is at least a less extreme form than traditional gambling because there's no potential to win money, which is what creates situations where people who have lost money have a greater incentive to keep going to try to win back their losses. This is one of the main things that makes gambling dangerous and leads people to being addicted, and this at least doesn't happen in Genshin Impact or other Gacha games. Then there are the positive qualities of Gacha itself, because whether you like it or not, this genre is popular with many people, and it's not because their entire player bases are compromised of gambling addicts and innocent fools brainwashed by cute anime girls. Of course, there are positive qualities of these games that can be found in many games, including story, character designs, music, and gameplay, but there are things the Gacha system creates which aren't common in other games, such as the sense of progression, the sense of value, and the community. The very first character I received from rolling in Genshin Impact was Bennett. A more experienced Genshin player was watching over my shoulder as this happened, and immediately told me this character, the first I'd got, the only non-free-to-play character I had, was terrible. Worst character in the game may have been a phrase that was used, but Bennett was my character. I resolved then to spite this person and the Gacha gods by using Bennett for the rest of my Genshin Impact playing life. Worst character, you say? That just means he is the best at being bad. To this day, I have used many characters, and the exact lineups of my party has changed like the weather, but Bennett has never been removed. He is the one constant, the only constant, in my time with this game. And the greatest part of all was, Bennett is not the worst character in the game. That was a lie, told to try to take advantage of my then ignorance to trick me into thinking I'd been unlucky. Bennett is actually amazing. He brings lots of healing, plus a noticeable damage boost through his ultimate, and the way his healing scales means you can still build for damage without sacrificing much healing. And his fire affinity makes him fit into almost any party effortlessly. He basically has it all. Well, except for an interesting story. Actually, he doesn't even have a real story, he's not important enough. He also has a rather boring character design. Kind of an annoying personality too, now that I think about it, but none of that ever mattered to me. Bennett was my character, and that was all it took to make him the best character. Sorry, Ayaka, you can dance all night long, My loyalty will always be with my boy, Ben. I have a certain level of attachment to most of the characters I use, and it's because characters are not given freely that I have come to appreciate them. I never would have formed an attachment to Bennett if he was just one of many characters I had available shortly after starting the game. But it's not just attachment that this acquisition method creates. My most played single-player game in the last couple years is Slay the Spire. It's a roguelite deck-building card game that's heavily skill-based, but the skill involved isn't really about the core gameplay. Most battles are quite straightforward. Instead, the skill comes from a series of small choices you make about which card to add to your deck after each fight. You need to understand the inherent value of cards to add the best ones, but even more than that, you need to understand the specific value these cards have relative to your current situation. In a traditional card game, you can build an exact deck where you choose every card in it and everything perfectly synergizes together, but you can never do this in Slay the Spire. Instead, every single run is about learning to make do with what you're given, and that's why this game is so fun despite its relatively simple gameplay and structure. Slay the Spire was not a game I expected Genshin Impact to remind me of, but it did. Gacha games are a bit like a really ridiculously long single run in a roguelike game, and if you don't learn to make do with what you're given, you won't be as successful. If there is one important skill in Genshin Impact, it's not anything to do with combat. Sure, combat does have some skill-based factors, particularly with knowing enemy attacks and avoiding them, and understanding and executing specific combos, but if you want skill-based action gameplay, you should look elsewhere. Instead, the real skill of Genshin Impact is resource management. There are many progression systems and you're always limited in what you have, whether that's characters, weapons, gold, energy, or time. In the face of such regular limitations, you're forced to constantly prioritize. Do you want to level this character or that one? Will rolling for this new character help you out, or is it better to wait for the next one? Are those last few expensive levels you could increase actually worth it? Should you spend resin on talent or artifacts or something else? You can pay money to help with these limitations, which is particularly true in the case of a second monthly pass called the Battle Pass, which costs $10 for 6 weeks, and is another way this game tries to persuade you to spend money even when it's not actually needed. But no matter how much money you spend, you can never remove the limitations. In fact, the more characters you have, the harder it can be to level them up or make the right decisions, particularly if you're constantly getting new characters which are replacing old characters you have already invested resources into. In this way, paying money can actually put players at a disadvantage if you aren't skillful enough at resource management. You could even say Genshin Impact is pay to lose. Most people would think that's a stupid thing to say, but it's not stupid to me. It's like how the bigger your house is, the more expensive its upkeep becomes. Sometimes less is more. Roguelites get much of their enjoyment from creating variables outside the player's control that players are then forced to react to. Gacha games share this quality, and just as I received many hours of enjoyment from trying to make do with what I was given in Slay the Spire, so too did I take a certain level of enjoyment from deciding how best to spend my resources in Genshin Impact. By making the right decisions, I felt like I was mastering these progression systems. And this is something players have to work out for themselves. You can go look up guides online about which are the best characters or strongest parties, and there are many videos and tier lists that try to provide this information, but you can't just copy these guides because you won't have exactly what's needed to do so. Instead, you're basically forced to work with what you have. For example, I once got a 5-star bow from the standard banner. This could be considered lucky, but I considered it unlucky because it was my first 5-star and I wanted a character. Still, sometimes you have to make your own luck. So, in response, I made the first 5-star character I focused on rolling for a bow user. This character isn't considered very strong for a 5-star, But I had a good weapon for them, plus other characters leveled up who would synergize well with them, plus a need for a water affinity character. This is me saying I chose Tartaglia over Hu Tao, and I consider this the right decision. I did get a 5-star spear too, actually, and Hu Tao is considered one of the very best characters in the game, so maybe it actually wasn't the right decision, but it was the right decision at the time, and I would never want Hu Tao over Tartaglia, because Tartaglia is mine, and I care for my characters. Gacha can be fun, for reasons that have nothing to do with the enjoyment of gambling. There is a skill involved in these gacha games that isn't seen in many others, and isn't obvious to those who haven't spent an extended period of time with them. But that's not all, because just as the variability of the genre can create interesting decisions, so too can it create a strong sense of community. As everyone's journey is slightly different, it makes people want to talk about their experiences and take an interest in other people's. People become invested in what characters other people get. Rolling for characters feels like an event, one that you want to share. And as progression is complicated and decisions related to it aren't obvious, it means knowledge from an experienced player can be invaluable, which provides a heavy incentive to talk to people about the game. And people do. In 2019, Fate Grand Order was the most talked about game on Twitter for the second year in a row, beating out games with much larger player bases like Minecraft or Fortnite. And since Genshin Impact released, it has taken that crown. These games have large active communities, and that sense of community elevates the experience. This might even be true for people who don't care about talking to others, because a strong community still has benefits, like how it leads to lots of content being created for these games. A lot of hentai. It means there is a lot of hentai for these games. At least that's what I've been told while researching this subject. And lastly, through the gacha system, these games are continually updated. This means not only is there a constant stream of new content with an ever-advancing story, but also that your time spent making progress in these games has a sense of long-term value. You aren't just grinding to get an item in a game that you'll complete in a few days and never play again. Everything you're doing instead has long-term benefit, providing you keep playing the game. I think this is one of the main reasons MMOs are popular. I've heard many MMO players say they can't enjoy single-player games anymore because single-player games feel pointless to them by comparison. Depending on your perspective, this might sound strange, but this attitude might be more common than you'd expect, and gacha games are another genre where this isn't the case, which usually also offer a lower barrier of entry than MMOs in terms of time required and intensity of gameplay. There is an audience for gacha games, and while it may not be you, that doesn't mean the reasons why people enjoy these games aren't valid for them. There may be victims from this system, but these games don't have entire player bases of victims. People who like these games aren't being psychologically held captive against their will, just waiting for a brave, valiant YouTuber to come along and reveal how evil this genre really is. Few things in life are that black and white, gacha included. So, where does this leave Genshin? Before playing Genshin Impact, I thought gacha was evil. Not in a despotic dictator committing war crimes kind of way, but in a casual, more insidious manner. I thought these games were a corrupting force within the industry that had the potential to cause great harm to their player bases, and Genshin Impact would be the worst of all in how it sought to bridge the gap towards traditional single-player games while exposing entirely new audiences to these corrupting practices. I don't believe this to be true anymore, however, and there should be an obvious lesson here, which is to be careful about what conclusions you draw about that which you don't really understand. Genshin Impact is a good game. It has some of the most enjoyable exploration I've ever experienced, and a sky-high level of polish that stretches across its many hours of game time. Its world is beautiful, and the idyllic atmosphere it creates is unrivaled. One of the most important questions I had when playing and then later evaluating this game was whether Genshin Impact would be a better game without the gacha elements. I've argued so far that gacha isn't black and white and that there are positives and negatives to this system, but yeah, no shit, there are always two sides to every story, and that doesn't mean one side isn't more correct. So, would Genshin Impact be a better game without the gacha? Well, yeah, there is at least the potential for the talent behind this game to have created something better if they didn't include any gacha elements. But it may not have been easy to do this without losing some of Genshin's positive qualities, and the game it would result in may not have been as enjoyable to the audience who currently enjoys it. And it wouldn't make as much money. And the subject of money does matter. miHoYo began as 3 students at university who just liked anime and games and wanted to make their own. They now employ over 2,400 people. Their first title was a simple 2D one-button game, and each subsequent title has been more ambitious than the last. The money they've made through each game has clearly been reinvested in the company, which has resulted in more games. This is where Genshin Impact came from. It's how a game of this level of quality was made possible by a largely unknown developer, and the money Genshin Impact makes might be used to make something even better in the future. It may also be reinvested back into Genshin Impact itself to create more high-quality content for this game's player base. The most recent update is 2.0, which added the brand new region of Inazuma. It is fantastic, featuring some of the best open-world content within the game and a much more engaging storyline than anything which preceded it. Inazuma has a different feeling than the last 2 regions. It's a storm in the night, dark and deadly, long stretches of somber rain that are interrupted by violent flashes of lightning. That sense of melancholy mixed with violence can be found in every part of this region's design. You feel it in the Civil War-focused main story, in the surprisingly sad side quests, in the soundtrack, in the visuals of its environments that combine natural beauty with decay, and in the mechanical aspects of the exploration, where lightning acts as an unseen threat from the sky, and special zones damage you over time, forcing you to have to frequently find shelter. Even the weather here seems to be hunting you down, as if to tell you you're not welcome. Inazuma is a thematically cohesive experience that subverts the idyllicism of the rest of the game to create something new and dangerous. The main story also feels like it has finally matured. It still has the problem of too much time being wasted with uninteresting NPCs, particularly during its start, but after this you're introduced to the region's complicated political landscape, which the player is pulled into against their wishes, and before you know it, the story is moving along with real dramatic tension, until it just stops. Inazuma is not finished. There are more regions to be released, and its story is only half told. But so far, it's been a real improvement on the already good base game. There have been 7 major updates in the 10 or so months since Genshin Impact first released, which have continued the main story while adding 5 new areas to explore, with the next update promising another 2. Some players may still feel there should have been more content released for a game so wildly successful, but some players will always expect more, and what has been released has been high quality. I imagine Genshin will continue to be updated for a long time to come, and if this level of quality is maintained, it makes for another reason in the gacha system's favour. Money can be reinvested back into the game in a way that benefits all players. So, to draw any real conclusion about Genshin Impact, perhaps you have to admit that it will depend on the individual player. There are reasons someone might want to avoid this game. Some people don't wish to play games made in China due to the actions of the Chinese government. Some people don't want to play free-to-play games. Some people might just find anime tropes annoying. These are all valid reasons if that's your opinion. And there are, of course, people who, whether due to personal circumstances or individual psychology, are just more vulnerable to the negative aspects of this kind of monetization. And while I wouldn't suggest that such people shouldn't be free to do as they please with their money, it is important that all people are aware there is some level of risk here, as with other potentially dangerous things in life like alcohol, unhealthy food, and other forms of gambling. And maybe this means there should be regulation for this type of game to make sure this risk is made clear for potential players, as we see with other potentially dangerous things. The irony here is that the people who are most vulnerable might be the same people who would most enjoy the game, up until the moment they don't. Gambling addicts start as people who enjoy gambling, and the more you like Genshin Impact, the more incentive you have to spend money on it. You also need to consider that for everything said in this video, I might be biased, because I am not that person. I don't have an addictive personality, I also don't enjoy gambling and never have, and I don't even enjoy collecting things. I much prefer to just appreciate what I have. I think I was like this even as a child. I remember I didn't want to collect all the Pokemon because why do I need them all when you only use 6? Collecting them for the sake of collecting them just seemed sad to 7-year-old me. I didn't want to trap these creatures in a pocket dimension of nothingness for eternity just to tick a box on a Pokedex. I guess this opinion on Pokemon wasn't normal for a child. If it was, they did not create a good slogan for that series. But if you wanted to catch them all, maybe you would have a different outlook on acquiring characters and spending money in Genshin Impact than I do. Still, the best way to think about Genshin Impact might be to think of it in terms of an investment. And this also brings me to the final and largest problem I have with this game. You could think of every game as an investment. You put in money and time, and get out enjoyment. As you probably don't enjoy every game you play, some games will be bad investments, but where other games might ask for $60 and 15 hours of your time, Genshin Impact is potentially a much larger investment, meaning if that investment does turn bad, your loss could be much greater. The real problem with Genshin Impact then is that players might not realize it's a bad investment until they're already heavily invested. If you spend $1,460 to get a 6 constellation 5-star character, it might be fun in the moment when you're rolling, and you might get some enjoyment from using this character in game. But how many people would actually get $1,460 worth of enjoyment? My guess is almost none, because no matter how rich you might be, there are surely better things to spend that money on. But the gacha system misleads people into not realizing that this is a bad investment until it's too late. You could think about many other things in life in this way too, and I don't just mean those that involve money. For example, if you eat a lot of unhealthy food, you might enjoy it in the moment, but maybe your short-term enjoyment isn't worth the long-term negative health consequences. That unhealthy food might end up being a bad investment, even though it seemed like a good investment at the time it was entering your mouth. This is spending money in gacha games, and that's why you have to diversify your assets, understand your risk tolerance, and not spend $1,460 on a character in a video game. The thing is, up until now, this video has been largely focused on Genshin Impact as a financial investment. Is the enjoyment you get from Genshin Impact worth the money you put into it? Well, the answer to that is, if you're free to play, then yes. If you're a whale, then no. And if you're someone in between, then it depends. Simple. Except there's a second cost you need to consider. Time. And it's for this reason that I don't think Genshin Impact is a truly great game as it is currently, even if you are okay with the gacha elements. The exploration in this game is amazing, the story can be enjoyable, and the progression involves interesting systems and decision making. But there's no point to it. If this game has an endgame, all it involves is logging in to do a few daily quests and spending a resource called resin, which is basically an energy system that is used to gather progression-related resources. This takes about 15 minutes per day, I timed it multiple times to check, and through this you gain primogems and resources to upgrade your characters, but there's no reason you need upgraded characters. There is one piece of what could be considered endgame content, which is Spiral Abyss. This is basically a gauntlet-based challenge dungeon requiring 2 full parties of characters. It involves defeating different groups of enemies, takes 1 to 2 hours, resets twice a month, and rewards up to 600 primogems. For those who don't remember, 600 primogems has a dollar value of 1, based on the Welcome Pass conversion rate, and 7.4 otherwise, but even if you have a weak group of characters, you'll probably still be able to get many of those 600 primogems, just not all of them. In the Abyss, the exact enemies change slightly over time, and there are different buffs and debuffs each reset to add some variety, but this is the only piece of challenging content in the game, and while it's fun to do a few times to have some type of content that tests how good your party really is, the Spiral Abyss alone doesn't feel like anywhere close to enough content to justify the time you might spend grinding to improve your characters. Grinding itself can sometimes be enjoyable. It can be fun to make progress and get stronger, but only because we expect there to be a worthwhile destination at the end of that journey. And in Genshin Impact, there isn't. MMOs also ask players to invest large amounts of time, often split over several days, for the promise of some future reward. This is usually enjoyment from dungeons and raids or PvP, or just better items. Sometimes you hear that these games don't get good until endgame, and this is used to forgive a boring early game. But if you were to compare the endgame in Genshin Impact to the endgame in any MMO, then Genshin would seem incredibly lacking. And yet, Genshin Impact still encourages you to log in every day to do your dailies and spend your resin, doing repetitive tasks over and over again. After a while, this might not be enjoyable, and it therefore becomes a bad time investment. Even the grind itself has significant room for improvement. One of the most common things to spend resin on is domains, which give artifacts and items to upgrade talents and weapons. But every single time you do a certain domain, you fight the exact same waves of enemies. For the RNG-based artifact system, you may end up doing a single domain 10, 20, 50 times even, and each time the gameplay will be exactly the same. At the very least, if miHoYo expected players to do this content multiple times, they could have added multiple variations for each domain, so you don't always fight the exact same enemies. They could also add a unique buff and debuff which changes each week, similar to how it is in the Abyss, that would hopefully add a little bit of strategy into how you approach this content. And this is just one of many ways the grind could be improved. But, as it is currently, it feels like almost nothing has been done to make the grind more interesting, and while this game has received plenty of content updates since release, this side has remained largely neglected the entire time. So, after you finish the story and exploration, grinding stops being an enjoyable part of Genshin Impact, and there's no reward for actually doing it by way of content outside of the Abyss, which isn't enough. But this may not be clear to people until you have already invested time into this side of the game, because the progression systems encourage you to keep improving your characters, and the energy system encourages you to use resin each day or risk losing it. You don't need to grind. New events, regions, and story content will never be a high difficulty. At least they certainly haven't been so far, and if you do somehow fall behind, you can always lower the world level to accommodate this. But the game design encourages players to grind anyway, despite it not being enjoyable in the long run, probably because, just as with the Gacha system, it makes more money to keep players logging in while trapping them in a never-ending progression treadmill that helps to make people feel like they need to play every day and get all the latest characters. As a single-player open-world game, Genshin Impact is great, but it's like there's a second half-finished game attached to it that tricks people into wasting their time, on top of the gacha system that tricks people into wasting their money. Which is why, despite in many ways loving this game, I am going to stop logging in outside of new events. Dailies and resin don't take up that much time, but doing them every day just isn't fun after a while. I know this, I've been here before in MMOs, and so I won't do it. I don't want to look back one day and regret wasting time on something that didn't matter and wasn't enjoyable. It's a bad time investment, and in the long run, forcing myself to stop doing this might actually be the best way to keep enjoying this game, which is something I do still intend to do. Because for all the problems mentioned in this video, all the potential negatives of the gacha system, and the pointlessness of the grind, I don't regret playing this game at all. At its very best, Genshin Impact is magical, and its promise of an idyllic world to escape into is unrivaled, even if that escape is, as always in life, only fleeting. Genshin Impact is sipping an ice-cold drink in the garden on a bright sunny day. It's the warm glow of the setting sun hovering over the city as you make your way home after work. It's the sound of birds singing outside your window on a Saturday morning as you spend an extra hour in bed. It's stopping to listen to the music that first time you climb above the clouds. And I don't mind overlooking all the negatives to keep enjoying that. Gacha is quite possibly bad for you, just like many things in life are. So enjoy responsibly and don't get tricked into bad investments, because there will always be things that try to trick you. Speaking of which, I have a Patreon. It may not provide very good returns if you donate to it, but it might at least be a better investment than a 6 constellation 5-star character in Genshin Impact. Other than that, if the Chinese gaming industry sounds interesting, then boy do I have a video for you. Regardless though, thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll enjoy the next one too. Whatever and whenever that may be.